He played with her heart but gambled with his own life. Marrying the millionaire's daughter seemed like just a game, until the father-in-law discovered everything and silently planned the revenge that would change that fate forever. Morning arrived like any other in New York City, with the sound of cars on Fifth Avenue rising through the windows of the mirrored skyscrapers. But for Helen Caldwell, that was no ordinary day. It was her wedding day. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. But as she looked at the white dress hanging on the closet door, she felt only a strange emptiness in her chest, as if something important were missing, and she couldn't identify what. The fine fabric swayed slightly in the breeze coming through the ajar window, and Helen wondered if it was normal to feel so much uncertainty when she should have been feeling joy. Helen was 28 years old, with brown hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders, dark eyes that carried a silent depth, and a smile that, in recent months, had become increasingly rare. The only daughter of Maurice Caldwell, a businessman who had once owned one of the largest construction companies in New York, she had grown up surrounded by luxury, parties, and expectations. Her childhood had been filled with private schools, international trips, and designer clothes, but also with a loneliness that no expensive toy could fill. Maurice had always been a distant man, obsessed with work, with numbers, with contracts. He came home late, left early, and when he was physically present, his mind wandered through spreadsheets and future meetings. Helen's mother, Cecilia, had passed away when she was only 12, a heart problem that no one expected, which came suddenly and took away the only person who truly saw Helen as more than an extension of the family's plans. Cecilia had been a literature professor before getting married, a delicate woman who loved poetry and classical music. She read to Helen every night, told made-up stories, asked questions about what her daughter felt, about her dreams. When she was gone, the house fell silent. Maurice plunged even deeper into his work, as if the pain could be buried under contracts and negotiations. Helen was left in the care of kind but distant housekeepers, growing up in a huge apartment that seemed increasingly empty. In recent years, however, everything had changed. Maurice's company began to sink. Cancelled projects, accumulated debts, partners who disappeared like rats abandoning a burning ship. The real estate market had gone through successive crises, and Maurice, who had always trusted his intuition too much, made risky investments that didn't pay off. He had taken out loans he couldn't repay, lost important contracts, and watched his reputation tarnish. The man who had always seemed invincible now walked through the house with stooped shoulders, a lost gaze, his hands trembling as he signed papers that could no longer save the empire he had built. Helen watched him with a mixture of pity and frustration. She had offered to help several times. After all, she had a degree in business administration from the Wharton School of Business, but Maurice always refused with a tired smile, saying she didn't need to worry about men's affairs. And it was in this moment of desperation that he looked at Helen not as a daughter, but as a solution. She noticed the change in his eyes. Suddenly, Maurice began taking her to social events he had previously considered boring. He introduced her to businessmen, investors, men of influence, always with a forced smile, always highlighting her qualities as if he were selling a product. Helen felt uncomfortable, but didn't fully understand what was happening until Edward Alistair Morrison appeared. The groom's name was Edward Alistair Morrison, 32 years old, blonde hair carefully combed back, blue eyes that shone with an irritating confidence, a calculated smile. Heir to one of the country's largest corporations, Morrison Holdings, which operated in various sectors from mining to technology. The Morrison family company was a corporate monster, with tentacles in various areas of the American economy, known as much for its financial success as for its aggressive negotiation tactics. Edward had appeared in Helen's life just over a year ago, at a charity event at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The night was cold, and Helen wore a simple navy blue dress without flashy jewelry. She was there more out of obligation than desire, accompanying her father, who was trying to maintain social appearances even as his company crumbled. Edward had approached her near the canapé's table, with a glass of champagne in his hand and a smile that seemed rehearsed. He had been charming, attentive, interested. He asked questions about her, about what she liked to do, about her interests. Helen, tired of loneliness and her father's pressure, allowed herself to believe that maybe, finally, someone truly saw her. In the following months, Edward brought flowers, wrote affectionate messages, made declarations that seemed sincere. He took her to dinners at sophisticated restaurants, for helicopter rides over the city, for weekends at exclusive resorts. It was all very beautiful, very perfect, perhaps too perfect. The marriage proposal happened on a winter night, in a sophisticated restaurant on the Upper East Side. The place was discreet but luxurious, with low lighting and soft music in the background. Edward knelt before her in the middle of dinner, with a diamond ring worth more than many people would earn in years of work. Helen said yes, not because her heart was exploding with joy, but because it seemed like the next natural step, and because her father, sitting at another table in the same restaurant as if it had all been arranged, applauded with tears in his eyes. In that moment, Helen felt a strange pang in her stomach, a feeling that something was wrong, but she pushed the feeling away. Maybe it was just nerves, she thought. Maybe it was normal to feel fear in the face of such a big decision. It was only later, in the months that followed, that Helen began to notice the cracks. Edward was always too busy for deep conversations. He never asked about her dreams, about what she really wanted from life. The conversations always revolved around business, mergers, contracts. When Helen tried to talk about her feelings, about her insecurities, Edward would change the subject or say she was being too sensitive. He never showed vulnerability, never shared his own doubts. It was as if he wore a permanent mask, and Helen began to wonder if there was a real person behind that polished facade. And then the meetings began. Maurice and Edward's father, Henry Morrison, a 60-year-old man with eyes as cold as ice and a smile that never reached his eyes, met constantly at the Caldwell family office. Helen heard fragments of conversations through the closed doors, words like partnership, acquisition, controlling interest. She tried to ask her father what was happening, but Maurice just smiled tiredly and said it was men's business, that she didn't need to worry. That phrase irritated her deeply. She had the education, she had the intelligence, but she was constantly left out of decisions that clearly involved her future. The suspicion grew like a seed planted in fertile soil. Helen was not naive. A graduate of the Wharton School of Business, she understood business. She knew how to recognize when something didn't add up, and the more Edward avoided talking about their future in a concrete way, about real plans, about where they would live, about whether they wanted to have children, the more she felt that something was wrong. He always gave vague answers, always postponed these conversations, always said they would have time to think about it after the wedding. But the wedding was approaching quickly, and Helen felt she was being pushed into something she didn't fully comprehend. Until 3 weeks before the wedding, Helen made a decision. She was home alone one Tuesday afternoon when she accidentally found a folder left on Maurice's office desk. Inside were documents about a prenuptial agreement. She knew this type of contract was common in marriages between wealthy families, but something in the way it was written bothered her. There were strange clauses, technical terms she didn't fully understand, and her father's company name appeared in several places. It made her uneasy. She photographed a few pages with her phone and decided she needed answers. Real answers, not the half-truths her father and Edward had been giving. She hired a private investigator. Her name was Julia Fisher, a woman in her early 40s with short, graying hair, a sharp gaze, and a posture that conveyed immediate confidence. Julia worked with absolute discretion and had an impeccable reputation in the market. Helen had found her through a discreet recommendation from an old college friend who had gone through a complicated divorce. They met in a small office in Greenwich Village, far from the prying eyes of the Manhattan elite. The place was simple, with white walls and functional furniture, no unnecessary luxury. Helen explained her suspicions, handed over all the information she had on Edward and his family, including the photos of the prenuptial agreement. Julia listened in silence, made a few notes in a worn notebook, and said only with a firm voice and serious eyes, "I'll find out the truth. It may take a few days, but I'll find out." The weeks that followed were of growing anxiety. Helen maintained her routine, the rehearsals for the ceremony, the fittings for the dress that seemed increasingly tight, even though it hadn't changed size, the dinners with the Morrison family, where she smiled politely while feeling a knot in her stomach. But inside she was on constant alert, waiting, observing every gesture, every word spoken between the lines. Edward remained the same, charming and distant, always with that smile that now seemed more like a mask than a genuine expression. Henry Morrison treated her with a cold cordiality, as if she were a valuable object he had just acquired, always making comments about how she would be a great wife and how the family business would prosper with this union. And Maurice seemed increasingly relieved, as if a huge weight was about to be lifted from his shoulders. He walked lighter, smiled more, but his eyes remained tired. Helen began to pay attention to details that had previously gone unnoticed, the way Edward looked at her without really seeing her, the way he touched her hand in public, always performative, always aware of who was watching, the phone conversations he had, which he would abruptly end when she entered the room, the emails he would quickly close on his computer screen when she approached. All of this fed the growing feeling that she was being deceived, that there was a parallel story happening, and she was the only one who didn't know the script. Then on Thursday afternoon, 2 days before the wedding, Julia called. Helen was alone in the apartment, looking out the window at the grey city below. A light rain was beginning to fall, blurring the glass. The phone's ring made her jump. The investigator's voice sounded serious on the other end of the line, no beating around the bush, straight to the point. "We need to talk in person. Today. Now. It's urgent." Helen felt her heart race. She agreed, grabbed a jacket, and left without telling anyone where she was going. They met at a discreet coffee shop in Soho, a small place with few tables, frequented more by locals than by tourists or the elite. Julia arrived with a brown folder under her arm and a look that said everything before she even opened her mouth. There was a gravity in her movements, a restrained urgency. They sat at a table in the corner, away from other people. Julia slid the folder across the worn wooden table and said, in a low but firm voice, "You were right to be suspicious. Everything you imagined is correct, and it's worse than you." "And thought?" Helen felt her mouth go dry. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder. Inside were documents, printed photos, transcripts of conversations. Julia explained in a low, controlled voice, as if presenting evidence in a courtroom. Edward didn't love her. He never had. It was all just a bet between him and a group of friends from the Manhattan business elite. The challenge was simple, cruel, and inhuman. To conquer a woman from a traditional family in financial trouble, get married, take control of her family's company, and display the victory as a trophy. There was even a prize involved, an absurd amount of money that would be divided among the participants when the mission was accomplished. Helen felt the world spin around her. Julia's words seemed to come from far away, muffled, as if she were underwater. Julia continued, relentless. The prenuptial agreement her father and Edward's father were preparing was a sophisticated legal trap. It was drafted in a way that would transfer the controlling interest of the Caldwell Company to Edward as soon as the marriage was consummated. In a few months, maybe a year, Maurice would lose everything that remained of the family empire, and Edward would become the absolute owner. The company would be absorbed into Morrison Holdings, and the Caldwell name would disappear from the market. Maurice probably didn't even fully understand what he was signing, blinded by desperation and the promise of a financial salvation that would never come. But that wasn't all. Julia had discovered something else, something that could completely change the game. Edward had an older brother, Gabriel Morrison. He had been kicked out of the family years ago for refusing to participate in the power games and manipulation that Henry Morrison considered essential for success. Gabriel had publicly disagreed with the company's practices, denounced internal corruption schemes, exposed fraudulent contracts, and had been disinherited for it. Henry did not tolerate dissent, especially from within his own family. Since then, Gabriel had lived apart, working as an independent business consultant. Few knew, but he was a silent partner in a company that was growing rapidly in the market, a direct rival of Morrison Holdings, focused on ethical and transparent practices. Helen listened to everything in silence. When Julia finished, she slowly closed the folder, took a deep breath, trying to control the anger that was growing inside her like a wave about to break, and said in a voice firmer than she expected, "I need more proof, concrete proof, something I can use, something that leaves no room for doubt." Julia smiled slightly, as if expecting exactly that reaction. "I already have it. I managed to record a conversation between Edward and his best man, Roger Taylor. They were at a bar in the financial district 3 nights ago, thinking no one was listening. Edward confesses everything. The bet, the plan, the company takeover. He even laughs while telling the details. It's all here." Julia slid a small flash drive across the table, an object so small yet carrying the entire truth. Helen took the object with trembling hands and put it in her purse, feeling its weight far beyond the physical. That night, alone in the apartment while Maurice was in another meeting with lawyers, Helen plugged the flash drive into her computer and listened to the recording. Edward's voice sounded clear, arrogant, amused. He laughed as he told how he had won her trust, how easy it had been to make her fall in love, how her father was easy to manipulate, so desperate that he would accept anything, how in a few months he would own everything that was left of the Caldwell Company. The best man asked if he felt anything for her, if there wasn't at least a little guilt. Edward responded with a coldness that cut like a blade. "She's pretty, educated, well-behaved, but that's it. She's a means to an end. When everything is in my name, we'll get a divorce, and that's that. She'll get a generous alimony, so she doesn't complain too much. And I'll get what really matters, the power, the control, the victory." Helen turned off the audio. She felt tears burn in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not yet. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking her. She looked at the wedding dress hanging in the closet, that white dress that was supposed to represent purity and new beginnings, and made a decision that would change everything. She would not cancel the wedding. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her broken, humiliated, running away like a jilted bride. She would go to the altar, she would smile, she would say yes, and then from the inside, with calm and strategy, she would dismantle every piece of that dirty game, piece by piece. She would not be the victim of this story. She would be the author of the ending. The next morning, Helen woke up with a mental clarity she hadn't felt in months. The pain of betrayal still throbbed in her chest, but there was something stronger now, a cold, calculated determination. She would no longer be a pawn on anyone's chessboard. She would be the player. She took a long shower, dressed carefully, choosing a sober but elegant outfit, and left the house before Maurice woke up. She had a plan and she needed to act quickly. Helen sought out a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but someone of absolute trust. His name was Dr. Francis Allen, a 50-year-old man with graying hair combed back, discreet framed glasses, and an impeccable reputation in the market. A specialist in corporate law and contracts, known for his discretion and surgical efficiency in complex cases. Helen had met him years ago when he worked for her father's company in better times. She remembered seeing him in the office hallways, always serious, always focused, but with a kind look when he passed her. He had been one of the few who had asked how she was when Cecilia passed away, not just her father, but directly to her, as if her emotions mattered. Helen scheduled an urgent meeting and brought the recording and all the documents Julia had given her. Dr. Allen's office was in a discreet commercial building on Wall Street, far from the ostentatious luxury of the large corporate firms. The waiting room was simple, with magazines organized on a coffee table and an efficient secretary who greeted her with a professional smile. Minutes later, she was led into the main office. Dr. Allen stood up to greet her, and Helen noticed the genuine concern in his eyes when he saw her expression. "Sit down, Helen." "What happened?" he asked, indicating a comfortable chair in front of his desk. Helen took a deep breath and began to tell him everything, from the first suspicions to Julia's investigation, through the devastating recording and the prenuptial agreement documents. She spoke clearly, objectively, keeping her voice steady even when she felt like screaming or crying. Dr. Allen listened with absolute attention, making occasional notes on a notepad. When she finished, She slid the flash drive and the folder of documents across the desk. Dr. Allen plugged in the flash drive and listened to the recording with headphones, his expression growing increasingly serious. Then, he analyzed the prenuptial agreement, line by line, making marks with a red pen on several sections. The silence in the office was heavy, broken only by the occasional sound of pages turning. Helen waited, feeling each second drag on like an eternity. When he finished, he took off his glasses, cleaned the lenses with a cloth, and looked at Helen with an expression that mixed indignation and determination. This contract is a fraud. It's filled with abusive and illegal clauses. It was drafted in evident bad faith, with the sole purpose of deceiving you and your father. Any minimally competent judge would nullify this without a second thought. Furthermore, with this recording, you have irrefutable proof of fraudulent intent. We can not only nullify the contract, but also block any attempt at a corporate transfer and still sue both Edward and his father for attempted fraud, embezzlement, and emotional distress. This is a clear case of contractual bad faith. Helen felt a wave of relief mixed with anger. The confirmation that she wasn't crazy, that her suspicions were valid, brought a strange sense of victory amidst the chaos. So I can stop this. I can protect my father and the company. Dr. Allen nodded gravely. You can. But you need to act quickly and strategically. If you cancel the wedding now, they'll know immediately that you've discovered everything and will try to protect themselves. They'll hide evidence, create alternative versions, use every legal resource available to complicate any action you take. The best thing to do is let the wedding happen, but without consummating the union. Maintain physical distance, make an excuse if necessary, and right after, preferably the next day, we file all the lawsuits at once. We'll catch them by surprise, with everything documented, all the evidence organized. They won't have time to react properly. Helen thought for a moment. The idea of going to the altar, of saying yes in front of everyone, knowing the sham, was painful, but it was also powerful. It was her taking control of the situation. If I have to go to the altar to protect my father and destroy their plan, I will. Dr. Allen smiled for the first time since the conversation began. You're stronger than you imagine, Helen, and I'll be by your side every step of the way. I'll prepare all the documentation today. Tomorrow, on the wedding day, you act normally. On Saturday, right after the ceremony, you keep your distance. If necessary, stay in separate rooms, use any excuse. On Sunday morning, we file everything with the court, a request for annulment of the marriage due to fraud, a block on any corporate transfer, a lawsuit for moral and material damages. We will expose everything. Helen agreed. She left the office with a clear plan in her head, but there was one piece that still didn't fit. Gabriel Morrison, the exiled brother. Julia had said he was different, that he had refused to participate in the same practices that had destroyed so many lives. Helen needed to meet him. She needed to understand if he could be an ally or if he would be just another disappointment, another member of the Morrison family who couldn't be trusted. It was Julia who got the contact information. Gabriel worked in a modest office in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, far from the ostentatious luxury of his family. His company was called Ethical Corporate Consulting, a name that in itself said a lot about his values. Helen called from a payphone, not wanting to risk anyone tracing the call from her cell phone. She just said she needed urgent business consulting, that she had heard good things about his work. Gabriel agreed, scheduling a meeting for that same afternoon. The office was on the second floor of an old but well-maintained building with exposed brick walls and plants in the windows. When Helen entered, she found a simple but welcoming reception area. A young woman with curly hair, tied in a bun, greeted her with a genuine smile and led her to a small meeting room. And then Gabriel entered. Helen felt her breath catch for a second. He was completely different from Edward. Where Edward was polished and performative, Gabriel had a disarming naturalness. Light brown, slightly tousled hair, eyes that carried a quiet intensity, a bit of stubble that gave him a casual but not sloppy look. He wore jeans and a dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, no expensive suit or designer watch. And when he smiled, it was a smile that reached his eyes, genuine and warm. Helen Caldwell, right? A pleasure. I'm Gabriel. Please have a seat. He indicated a chair and sat on the other side of the table with a folder and a simple laptop. How can I help you?" Helen had mentally rehearsed what she would say, but in front of him the prepared words seemed inadequate. She decided to risk the truth, or at least part of it. "I need help with a delicate business situation. It involves fraudulent contracts and an attempt at the misappropriation of a family company. And it also involves your family. That's why I'm here." Gabriel stopped typing on his laptop and looked at her with renewed attention. His expression became serious, but not defensive. "My family, Morrison Holdings." "Yes. Your brother Edward is about to marry me. Tomorrow, actually. And I've discovered that it's all a fraud to take over my father's company." Helen carefully watched his reaction. Gabriel slowly closed his laptop, leaned back in his chair, and sighed deeply. He seemed to carry an invisible weight on his shoulders. So he finally did what I was afraid he would do. He looked at Helen with a mixture of sadness and restrained anger. "I'm sorry, I'm truly sorry that you've become a target of my family's games. I distanced myself from them precisely because I could no longer tolerate this kind of thing. My father and my brother don't see people, they only see pieces in a power game." "Did you know Edward was planning something like this?" Helen asked, still cautious. "I didn't know the specific details, but I know their methods. I've seen similar situations happen before. Companies swallowed up, families destroyed. And when I tried to report it, when I wanted to expose the illegal practices, I was kicked out, disinherited. My father said I was weak, that I didn't have what it takes to survive in the business world." Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that revealed old frustration. "But I don't consider that weakness. I consider it integrity. And if you're here, I imagine you've discovered the truth and want to do something about it." "I have. I have proof. I have a lawyer preparing lawsuits, but I need more information. I need to understand how Morrison Holdings operates, what their weak points are, how I can protect myself and my father." Helen leaned forward, her voice firm. "And I also need to know if I can trust you, because so far every man in your family has proven to be a manipulator." Gabriel looked her in the eyes for a long moment. There was a raw honesty in that look that Helen hadn't seen in Edward even once. "I understand your distrust, and I won't try to convince you with pretty words, but I can show you who I am through my actions. I can give you access to documents I have about the company's illegal operations. I can connect you with other people who were harmed and who would be willing to testify. I can help you build a solid case not just against Edward, but against the entire corrupt structure my father has created." He opened a drawer and took out a folder. "I've been keeping this for years, waiting for the right moment to use it. Maybe this is that moment." Helen took the folder and began to leaf through it. Inside were detailed documents about corruption schemes, fraudulent contracts, companies that had been purposely destroyed by Morrison Holdings. There were even names of other victims, people who could serve as witnesses. It was an arsenal of information that could not only save Maurice's company, but also cause serious damage to the reputation and operations of the Morrison family. "Why are you doing this?" Helen asked, still processing everything. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I've seen too many people be destroyed by them, and because I believe it's time for someone to truly stand up to them." Gabriel stood up and went to the window, looking at the street below. "Besides, I have to admit something. It's not just altruism. If you manage to expose their practices, it will weaken the company, and it might open up space for ethical businesses like mine to have a better chance of growing. But I promise to be transparent with you. No games, no manipulation. You deserve honesty." Helen stood up too. There was something about Gabriel that was different, an authenticity she hadn't encountered in a long time, and she needed allies. "Then let's work together, but on one condition: total transparency. If at any moment I feel you're deceiving me, I'm walking away and you become an enemy too." Gabriel extended his hand. "Agreed. Total transparency. And Helen, for better or worse, you're not alone in this." She shook his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip, the sincerity of the gesture. They spent the next few hours reviewing documents, outlining strategies, identifying weak points in the legal structure of Morrison Holdings. Gabriel explained details about how the company operated, what the most common schemes were, where the vulnerabilities lay. Helen shared the information Julia had gathered and Dr. Allen's analyses. Together, they built a comprehensive plan of attack. When it was already night, Helen looked at the clock and realized she had spent almost 6 hours in Gabriel's office. She needed to get back home before Maurice noticed her prolonged absence, but before she left, she turned to Gabriel. "Thank you for everything, for believing in me, for helping me." Gabriel smiled, and again that smile seemed genuine. "Thank you for having the courage to face this. Most people just accept it and move on. You're choosing to fight. That's admirable." Helen left the office with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't just relief at having found an ally. It was something more. A connection she hadn't expected to feel, but there was no time to analyze that now. Tomorrow was the wedding day, and she needed to be prepared for the performance of her life. When she got home, Maurice was in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked tired, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes she hadn't seen in a long time. "Helen, my daughter, tomorrow is the big day. Are you excited?" Helen forced a smile. "I am, Dad. A little nervous, but excited." She sat next to him, observing the man who had always been her hero, now so fragile and deluded. "Dad, can I ask you something? Why did you agree to the marriage so quickly? Why didn't you talk to me about the implications for the company?" Maurice looked at the glass in his hands, as if searching for the right words in the amber liquid. "I wanted to protect you, Helen. The company is sinking. I made wrong choices, invested poorly, trusted the wrong people. And I didn't want you to carry that burden. When the Morrison family offered the partnership, it seemed like the only way out. Edward is a good man from a powerful family. I thought you would be happy and the company would be saved. Two good things at once." Helen felt her throat tighten. Her father was trying to protect her, but he had ended up handing her over as a bargaining chip. And the worst part was, he didn't even realize it. "Dad, what if I told you there might be another way to solve this? Another way that doesn't involve the marriage?" Maurice looked at her, confused. "What other way, daughter? I've tried everything. Banks won't lend me any more money. Investors don't trust me. Morrison Holdings is the only hope." Helen held her father's hand, feeling the rough skin and prominent veins. "Tomorrow I'm getting married, Dad. I'm going to walk down that aisle because I promised. But after that, I need you to trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing, and that everything will be okay, better than you can imagine." Maurice squeezed her hand back, not fully understanding, but nodding. "I always trust you, my daughter. Always." Helen went up to her room and looked once more at the wedding dress. Tomorrow she would wear that white fabric, walk to the altar, look into Edward's eyes, and say yes. But it would be a yes laden with irony, a yes that hid a definitive no, a yes that was the first step toward the biggest twist that family had ever seen. And as she lay in bed, trying to sleep, she thought of Gabriel, of the way he had looked at her with respect, of the raw honesty of his words. And she wondered if, amidst the chaos, she hadn't found something unexpected, something that could be the beginning of a very different story from the one she was about to enact. The day dawned clear in New York, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing in Helen's heart. She woke up early before the alarm, with her stomach churning and her hands sweating. Today was the day she would walk down the aisle, say yes, and begin to dismantle the farce they had built around her. The apartment was already in motion. Housekeepers hurried back and forth. The phone rang constantly. Flowers arrived in absurd quantities. It was the organized chaos of an elite wedding. The makeup artist and hairstylist arrived at 8 in the morning. Helen sat in front of the bedroom mirror and let them work on her as if she were a doll. They chatted excitedly about how beautiful she looked, how perfect the day was, how lucky Edward was. Helen responded with monosyllables, smiling when necessary, but her mind was elsewhere. She was mentally reviewing every detail of the plan. Dr. Allen was on standby with all the documents prepared. Gabriel had confirmed via encrypted message that he would be available for any need. Julia was strategically positioned, ready to intervene if anything went out of control. When they finished, Helen looked at her reflection. Her hair was in an elegant updo with a few loose strands framing her face. Natural yet sophisticated makeup, enhancing her dark eyes. She looked like a perfect bride. On the outside, everything was impeccable. On the inside, she was pure strategy and cold determination. The dress came next. The childhood friends she barely saw anymore, but who had been invited to keep up appearances, helped her put it on. The fabric glided over her body like water, fitting perfectly. It really was a beautiful dress. A shame it represented a lie. When they put on the veil, Helen took a deep breath. She was ready. Maurice knocked on the door just before it was time to leave. When he entered and saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "You look beautiful, Helen. Just like your mother on our wedding day." He approached and held her hands. "I know I haven't been the best father. I know I've failed in many things, but today, seeing you like this, I have hope that everything will work out." Helen felt a tightness in her chest. Her father had no idea what was about to happen. "Dad, I need you to know something. No, need you to. Matter what happens today or in the next few days, I love you. And everything I do will be to protect us, to protect our family. Do you trust me?" Maurice seemed confused, but he nodded. "Of course I trust you, daughter. I always have. You're the most important thing in my life." The church chosen for the wedding was St. Patrick's Cathedral on the Upper East Side, a modern yet elegant structure, frequented by the Manhattan elite. When the limousine stopped in front, Helen saw the crowd of guests all dressed in their best, all curious, all waiting for the spectacle. Photographers were strategically positioned. Everything was being documented, which ironically played in Helen's favor. The more witnesses, the better. Maurice offered his arm, and together they walked to the entrance. The doors opened, and the music began. Helen took the first step. The nave of the church was packed. White and gold flowers decorated every corner. People turned to look at her, and she kept a fixed smile on her face. Her eyes searched for Edward at the altar. He was there in an impeccable tuxedo, his blonde hair shining under the light of the chandeliers, a confident smile on his face. Beside him, his best man Roger, an accomplice to his crimes. And in the front row, Henry Morrison, watching everything with that cold predator's gaze, having just secured his prey. But then Helen saw something that surprised her. At the back of the church in one of the last pews was Gabriel. He wasn't supposed to be there. No one had invited him. But there he was, in a simple suit, looking at her with an expression that mixed concern and encouragement. Their eyes met for a second, and Helen felt a wave of strength. She wasn't alone. There was at least one person in that church who truly saw her. The walk to the altar seemed to last both an eternity and a second. When she arrived, Maurice kissed her forehead and gave her to Edward, who held her hand with that performative touch she now recognized as false. The priest began the ceremony with the traditional words about love, commitment, partnership. Helen barely heard. She was focused on maintaining her composure, on appearing to be the emotional bride everyone expected to see. Then came the moment for the vows. The priest asked Edward if he took Helen as his wife, to love and respect her at all times. Edward responded with a firm "I do," looking at her with those blue eyes she once found beautiful and now recognized as empty. Then it was her turn. "Helen Caldwell, do you take Edward Alastair Morrison to be your husband, to love and respect him, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Helen looked at Edward. She looked at her father in the front row, crying with emotion. She looked at Henry Morrison with that victorious smile, and then she looked at Gabriel at the back of the church, who was watching her with intensity. She took a deep breath and said in a clear voice, "Yes, I do." The church erupted in applause. Edward leaned in to kiss her, but Helen turned her face subtly, making the kiss land only on the corner of her lips. If anyone noticed, they didn't comment. People were too busy applauding, taking pictures, celebrating. The priest declared them husband and wife, and the triumphant music began to play. Edward took Helen's arm, and together they walked back down the aisle. Helen maintained her smile, waved to the guests, played the part perfectly. But inside she was counting the seconds. The reception was to be held at the New York Equestrian Club, a traditional and sophisticated venue. When they arrived, it was a continuation of the spectacle. Champagne flowed, refined food was served, live music played, and emotional speeches were made. Henry Morrison gave a long toast about the union of families and prosperity in business, and Helen had to restrain herself from throwing her drink in his face. Maurice also gave a speech, his voice thick with emotion, talking about how happy he was to see his daughter so well married, about how he trusted Edward to take care of her. Every word was a stab to Helen's heart, but she kept smiling. Edward was in his element, circulating among the guests, receiving congratulations, laughing loudly, displaying that arrogant confidence. He barely stayed by Helen's side, always too busy with business conversations. And that was perfect for her plan. The less attention he paid to her, the better. It was during dinner that Helen managed a moment alone. She excused herself, saying she needed to touch up her makeup, and went to the women's restroom. There she locked herself in a stall and took out her phone. She sent a quick message to Dr. Allen. "It's done. I'm married. You can prepare everything for tomorrow." The reply came seconds later. "Understood. Everything is ready for Monday's action. Maintain physical distance tonight. It's crucial." When Helen left the restroom, she found Gabriel waiting discreetly in the hallway. He approached slowly, respecting the appropriate distance so as not to arouse suspicion. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. Helen looked around to make sure no one was listening. "I'm holding up. Thanks for coming. I didn't expect to see you here." Gabriel gave a half smile. "I wasn't going to let you face this alone. Even from a distance, I wanted you to know you have someone on your side." He hesitated for a moment. "Helen, if you need anything at all, just call me. I'll be available." Helen felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. "Thank you, Gabriel. Seriously. Thank you for everything." She quickly squeezed his hand, a brief but significant gesture, before returning to the ballroom. Edward hadn't even noticed her prolonged absence. The party continued into the night. There was the couple's waltz, the cutting of the cake, the bouquet toss. Helen performed each ritual mechanically, like an actress following a script. When the party finally started to wind down and the guests began to leave, Edward approached her with that conquering smile. "Ready to go home, my wife?" he whispered, and Helen's stomach churned at the possessive term. She forced a tired smile. "Edward, I'm exhausted. It's been a long and emotional day. Can't we just sleep tonight, start our married life tomorrow with more energy?" Edward seemed annoyed for a second, but quickly regained his composure. "Of course, dear. You must be really tired. Let's go home." He said it in a tone that sounded understanding, but Helen noticed the tension in his jaw. He was not happy with the postponement. They went to the apartment Edward had prepared for them, a luxurious space in the Jardins neighborhood. As soon as they entered, Helen continued with her plan. "Edward, I'm going to take a long bath and sleep in the guest room tonight, okay? I have a terrible headache and I don't want to bother you." Edward looked at her, with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, a mix of irritation and impatience. "All right, Helen, rest up. We have all the time in the world." But there was something in the way he said it that sounded like a threat. Helen locked herself in the guest room, leaned against the door, and finally allowed the tears to fall. She had done it. She had walked down the aisle, said yes, and now she had time to execute the next phase of the plan. But the tension was taking its toll. She carefully took off the dress, put it away in the closet, changed into comfortable pajamas, and lay down on the bed. She picked up her phone and sent a message to Gabriel. "Survived the day. Thanks for being there." The reply came quickly. "You were amazing. Rest now. Tomorrow, a new story begins." Helen slept little that night. Every noise in the house put her on alert. She was afraid Edward would try to enter the room, but he didn't. When the sun began to rise, she was already awake, planning her next steps. Dr. Allen would file the lawsuits early on Monday morning, but before that, Helen needed to get out of that apartment and put physical distance between herself and Edward. She waited until she heard Edward leave for his morning run, something he did religiously. As soon as the door closed, Helen packed a bag with essential clothes, personal documents, and the flash drive with the evidence. She called a cab and went straight to Maurice's apartment. When she arrived, her father was having coffee, surprised to see her. "Helen, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be with Edward?" Maurice asked, confused. Helen sat down next to him and held his hands. "Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully. Everything I'm about to tell you will be hard to hear, but it's the truth." And she spent the next hour revealing everything: the bet, the recording, the fraudulent contract, the plan to steal the company. Maurice listened in silence, his expression changing from confusion to shock, and finally to restrained anger. When she finished, Maurice was pale. "They used me. They used you. They turned my daughter into a bargaining chip." His voice trembled with fury. "How could I have been so blind? You were desperate, Dad. They took advantage of that. But now we're going to fight back." Helen showed him all the documents, played the recording for him. Maurice listened to Edward's voice confessing everything, and his hands clenched into fists. "I'm going to destroy them. I'll sue them. I'll expose them. I'll make them pay for this." Maurice stood up, pacing like a caged lion. "You won't have to, Dad. It's all in motion. Dr. Allen is filing the lawsuits tomorrow. Annulment of the marriage, blocking the corporate transfers, a lawsuit for moral and material damages. And there's more. Edward's brother, Gabriel, he's on our side. He has documents that could permanently destroy the reputation of Morrison Holdings." Helen took a deep breath. "We're going to win this, Dad. Together." Maurice looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and remorse. "I should have listened to you before. I should have included you in the decisions. You're much stronger and smarter than I ever gave you credit for. I'm sorry, Helen. I'm sorry for putting you in this situation." Helen hugged her father. "Now is not the time for guilt. It's time for action. And we're going to come out of this stronger than ever." They stood like that. For a moment, father and daughter united against a common enemy. Helen's phone rang. It was Edward. She answered, putting it on speaker so Maurice could hear. "Helen, where are you? I came back from my run and you weren't here." His voice sounded impatient. "I'm at my father's house. I needed to come sort some things out." Helen kept her voice neutral. "What things?" "We just got married. You should be here with me." Edward was clearly irritated. "Edward, I need some time. The wedding was very intense and I need to process everything. I'm going to stay at my father's for a few days." Helen waited for his reaction. There was a silence on the other end. Then Edward said, with a coldness he couldn't hide, "All right, Helen, but don't take too long. We have a lot of things to resolve. Papers to sign. You know." The veiled threat was clear. "I know, and we'll resolve everything on Monday." Helen hung up and looked at her father. "He's already impatient. He wants me to sign the transfer papers, but on Monday, when he receives the court notice, he'll find out the game has changed." The weekend passed slowly. Helen stayed at her father's apartment, reviewing documents with Dr. Allen via video conference, maintaining constant contact with Gabriel, who provided additional information about the structure of Morrison Holdings. Julia also sent new materials, including testimonies from other victims of the Morrison family, people willing to testify in court. The case was becoming bigger than Helen had initially imagined. It wasn't just about her and her father. It was about a pattern of predatory behavior that needed to be exposed. On Monday morning, Dr. Allen filed all the actions simultaneously in different courts: annulment of marriage due to fraud, blocking of corporate transfers, a civil suit for moral and material damages, a complaint to the district attorney's office about corporate fraud. It was a coordinated legal offensive, and Helen made sure the press would be informed. Not all the press, but specific journalists she knew to be serious and committed to the truth. The story would be public, and Morrison Holdings would have no way to hide. The reaction was explosive. Edward called in a rage, screaming on the phone, making empty threats. Henry Morrison tried to contact Maurice, offering deals, promising renegotiations, but it was too late. The pieces were in motion, and there was no stopping it. The news broke to the media on Tuesday. Heir to Morrison Holdings accused of marriage fraud. The news portals exploded with the story. Companies began to question their partnerships with Morrison Holdings. The company's stock plummeted. The scandal was complete, and at the center of it all, Helen stood firm, giving carefully controlled interviews, always with Dr. Allen by her side, always presenting facts and evidence, never resorting to personal attacks. The following weeks were a whirlwind. The media wouldn't let go of the case. Television shows debated corporate ethics, podcasts discussed power and gender dynamics in business, and social media buzzed with divided opinions. Helen became an unwilling symbol. To some, she was a heroine who had dared to confront a powerful family. To others, she was an opportunist seeking attention. She quickly learned to filter out the noise, focusing only on what truly mattered, winning the case and rebuilding her life. Dr. Allen worked tirelessly. He managed to secure not only the annulment of the marriage on grounds of proven fraud, but also a complete block on any corporate transfer involving Maurice's company. The prenuptial agreement was declared null and void due to vitiated consent and contractual bad faith. Furthermore, the civil suit for emotional distress was progressing rapidly, with the presiding judge showing clear indignation upon reviewing the evidence. The recording of Edward confessing the scheme was the final nail in the coffin. There was no possible defense against his own voice admitting everything, but the biggest victory came when the district attorney's office decided to investigate Morrison Holdings as a whole. Based on the documents Gabriel had provided and the testimonies of other victims that Helen and Julia had located, an investigation was opened into fraudulent practices, corruption, and misappropriation of assets. The company that had seemed unshakable began to crumble. Clients cancelled contracts, partners distanced themselves, investors withdrew capital. Henry Morrison tried to control the damage, giving interviews where he denied everything, accusing Helen of defamation, but each lie was quickly debunked by new evidence that emerged. Edward disappeared from public life. After his initial furious reactions, he withdrew, likely on the advice of his lawyers. But the damage was done. His reputation was ruined. Companies that once courted him now avoided him. The confident, arrogant playboy had become a social pariah. Throughout this process, Gabriel was a constant presence in Helen's life. He not only provided crucial information for the case, but also offered emotional support. They met regularly, initially just to discuss legal strategies and review documents, but gradually the conversations began to include other topics: dreams, fears, childhood stories, views on life. Helen discovered that Gabriel was different from any man she had ever known. He talked about his mother, who had passed away when he was 15 after a long battle with cancer. She had been the only person in the family who encouraged him to follow his own values, even when it meant going against Henry. Gabriel fondly remembered their conversations, the lessons on integrity and compassion she had tried to teach in a family obsessed with power and money. When she was gone, Gabriel felt he had lost his only ally. It was her death that eventually led him to break with the family, when he realized that Henry would not change and that Edward was following in his father's footsteps. Helen shared her own pains. She talked about the loneliness of growing up with an emotionally absent father, about losing her mother so young, about how she always felt she had to prove her worth, that she needed to be perfect to be loved. Gabriel listened with genuine attention, asking questions that showed he truly cared, not just about the facts, but about her feelings. It was on a rainy Thursday afternoon, 2 months after the unconsummated wedding, that something changed between them. They were in Gabriel's office, reviewing some more documents for the case, when Helen simply broke down. The accumulated tension, the constant stress, the public exposure, it all came to a head at once. She began to cry, not the delicate, restrained sobs she had learned to show in public, but deep sobs that came from somewhere very deep inside. Gabriel didn't try to stop her with empty words or platitudes. He simply approached, asked if he could hug her, and when she nodded yes, he wrapped her in his arms. Helen allowed herself to be vulnerable, something she hadn't done in a long time. She cried for everything she had lost, the illusion of a happy marriage, her trust in people, the innocence of believing in good intentions. But she also cried with relief, because she had found the strength to defend herself because there were real people by her side. When she finally calmed down, she pulled away slightly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to fall apart like that. You must think I'm weak." Gabriel gently held her face, making their eyes meet. "Helen, you are one of the strongest people I have ever met. Weakness would have been to accept all of this silently, to submit to a life of lies. You chose to fight. That is not weakness. It is pure courage. And crying doesn't make you any less strong. It makes you human." Something shifted in that moment. There was a tension in the air, a mutual awareness that this was more than a strategic friendship or an alliance of convenience. But neither of them did anything. The timing wasn't right. Helen was still technically married, still in the middle of legal proceedings, still too vulnerable. And Gabriel respected that completely. In the following weeks they continued to work together, but there was a new layer to their interactions. Glances that lasted a little longer, physical proximity that felt natural, but was charged with meaning, conversations that extended beyond what was necessary because neither of them wanted them to end. Maurice noticed. He saw how his daughter talked about Gabriel, how her eyes lit up when she mentioned a conversation they'd had, and he grew concerned. One evening after dinner, Maurice called Helen to talk. "Daughter, I need to tell you something. About Gabriel." Helen felt her stomach tighten, fearing what was to come. Her father continued, "I know you two have been getting closer, and I understand why. He helped you when no one else was willing to, but he's still a Morrison, and I'm afraid you'll get hurt again." Helen took a deep breath. "Dad, I understand your concern, but Gabriel is different. He was kicked out of the family precisely for not accepting their dirty games. He risked everything to help me, to expose the truth. It wasn't just strategy, it was a moral choice. And I trust him." Maurice sighed. "I know you're smart and that you can take care of yourself, but after everything we've been through, I just want you to be cautious. Not to rush into anything, to give yourself time to heal before opening your heart again." Helen held her father's hand. "I am being cautious, Dad. I promise. And so is Gabriel. Neither of us wants to rush anything, but I won't deny that there's a connection. And for the first time in a long time, it's a connection that feels real, that feels based on mutual respect and honesty. And that's scary, but it's also beautiful." Maurice hugged his daughter. "Then I trust your judgment. Just promise me you'll protect your heart this time. You deserve to be happy. You deserve someone who truly sees you." 3 months after the legal proceedings began, the first major victory came. The judge decreed the definitive annulment of the marriage on grounds of proven fraud. Helen was no longer Edward's wife. She was free. When the news arrived, she was at Gabriel's office. They had just finished a meeting about the next steps in the case against Morrison Holdings when Dr. Allen called with the news. Helen hung up the phone and looked at Gabriel with tears in her eyes. "It's annulled, officially annulled. I'm free." Gabriel smiled, that genuine smile she had grown to love. "Congratulations, Helen. You fought and you won. You deserve every second of this victory." Without thinking, Helen moved closer and hugged him. It was a hug, of gratitude, of relief, of celebration. But when they pulled apart, they stood there very close, looking at each other. Helen could feel his breath, see the small golden flecks in his brown eyes, notice the way he watched her with a mixture of admiration and something deeper. "Can I kiss you?" Gabriel asked softly, respectfully, giving her full control of the situation. Helen felt her heart race. She knew this would change everything, that there was no turning back. But she also knew she wanted this, that she was ready. "Yes, you can." The kiss was gentle, careful, filled with restrained emotion. It wasn't a passionate, desperate kiss. It was a kiss of promise, of beginning, of possibility. When they separated, they were both smiling. Gabriel ran his thumb across her cheek. "I don't want to be a reaction. I don't want to be the opposite of Edward. I want to be a conscious choice. So let's take it slow, okay? In your own time." Helen nodded, touched by his sensitivity. "Thank you for understanding, for being patient." for being you." They stood there for another moment, just enjoying each other's presence before returning to work. But something had definitively changed. They were no longer just allies. They were something more, something that was growing organically and healthily. The months that followed were about rebuilding. Maurice's company, free from the threat of Morrison Holdings, began to slowly recover. With the help of new investors Gabriel introduced, people who valued ethics and transparency, Caldwell Construction started to grow again. Maurice delegated more responsibilities to Helen, finally recognizing her capabilities. She took on a director position focusing on sustainable projects and ethical relationships with suppliers and employees. Gabriel and Helen officially started dating. They kept it discreet at first, knowing the media was still watching Helen's every move. But gradually, they allowed themselves to appear together at events, dinners, and public moments. The reaction was mixed. Some criticized, saying she was dating another Morrison, that she hadn't learned her lesson. Others celebrated, seeing it as a story of redemption where not everyone in the family was a villain. Helen learned not to care so much about others' opinions. She knew the truth about Gabriel, about his character, about how he treated her. And that's what mattered. He never tried to control her, never disrespected her boundaries, never treated her like property. He challenged her intellectually, supported her decisions, celebrated her victories, and comforted her in defeats. He was a true partner. They traveled together for the first time 6 months after they started dating. They went to the Hamptons, a quiet place where they could just be two people enjoying each other's company, away from the spotlight of New York City. They walked on the beach hand in hand, talked about the future, about dreams and plans. Gabriel spoke of his desire to expand his consultancy, to help more companies adopt ethical practices. Helen shared her wish to transform her father's company into a benchmark for social and environmental responsibility. One evening, dining at a seaside restaurant, Gabriel held Helen's hand across the table. "I need to tell you something, and it's important that you know this doesn't come from a place of pressure or expectation. It's just a truth I want to share." Helen looked at him attentively. He continued, "I've fallen in love with you, for real. Not with the version you show the world, not the strong businesswoman or the brave survivor. With you, the woman who laughs at silly jokes, who cries watching sad movies, who's afraid of cockroaches, but faces down corrupt businessmen without blinking. The complete woman with all your complexities and contradictions." Helen felt her eyes fill with tears. The good kind, the ones that come from positive emotion. "I've fallen in love with you too, Gabriel. And it was scary at first because after everything I went through with Edward, I was afraid I'd never be able to trust anyone again. But you showed me that not all men are the same. That there's a love that doesn't control, that doesn't suffocate, that doesn't use. There's a love that sets you free, and that's what I feel when I'm with you. Freedom." They kissed there, under the stars, with the sound of the waves in the background, and for the first time in a long time, Helen felt she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with who she was supposed to be with. Not because someone had decided for her, but because she had chosen, and that choice made all the difference. When they returned to New York, there was news. The case against Edward and Henry Morrison had resulted in convictions. Edward was ordered to pay substantial damages for emotional distress to Helen, in addition to being barred from holding executive positions in companies for 5 years. Henry faced more serious charges related to the operations of Morrison Holdings, with legal battles that would stretch on for years. The company, already crippled, entered a forced restructuring process, selling off assets and cutting operations. Helen didn't feel satisfaction at their destruction. She only felt a necessary closure. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. It was about ensuring they couldn't do this to anyone else. And as for the settlement money, Helen had plans. She wanted to use part of it to create a support fund for women who were victims of manipulation in relationships, offering free legal and psychological support. She wanted to turn her pain into a tool to help others. Gabriel fully supported the idea. Better yet, he proposed they join forces. That his consultancy would partner with Helen's project, creating a larger initiative to combat corporate and personal manipulation. They called it the Phoenix Project. The response was surprising. Women from all over the country began to seek help, sharing stories of similar situations, of men who had used them, of families who had treated them like commodities. And the project grew, expanded, and became a benchmark. A year after the wedding that should never have happened, Helen and Gabriel were in a completely different position. Maurice's company was healthy again. Gabriel's consultancy was thriving. The Phoenix Project was helping dozens of women every month, and their relationship was solid, built on a foundation of trust, respect, and genuine love. Maurice, who initially had reservations about Gabriel, had learned to respect him and even consider him part of the family. He saw how the young man treated his daughter, how he made her genuinely smile, how he supported her without trying to diminish her. And that was all a father could want for his daughter. 2 years had passed since that day at the altar. Helen was sitting in her office at Caldwell Construction, looking out the window at the city that no longer seemed so grey. New York was still chaotic, noisy, challenging, but now she saw beauty in that chaos. She saw possibilities where before she only saw obstacles. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Gabriel. "Hi, love. Just calling to confirm our dinner tonight. I have some news to tell you." His voice always brought a smile to her face, even on difficult days. "Confirmed. I'm looking forward to the news. Can you give me a hint?" Helen teased, knowing he probably wouldn't say anything. "Patience. You'll like it, I promise. I'll pick you up at 8?" Gabriel replied with that playful tone she had grown to love. "Perfect. I love you," Helen said naturally, without fear, without reservation. A phrase that once seemed impossible to say again now came with ease. "I love you too. See you soon." They hung up and Helen returned to the reports she needed to review. The company was doing well, but she never completely relaxed. She had learned that success required constant vigilance, not out of paranoia, but out of responsibility. The afternoon passed quickly with meetings and decisions. Helen was implementing a new training program for employees, offering free specialization courses and creating clear career growth paths. It was expensive, but she believed that investing in people was investing in the company's future. Maurice fully supported her, amazed by his daughter's vision. He already spoke openly about eventually passing full command to her, something unthinkable years ago, when he saw her only as the daughter who needed protecting. At 8 o'clock sharp, Gabriel was in the lobby. Helen went down and found him leaning against the car with that smile that still made her heart race. He wore jeans and a light blue dress shirt, simple but elegant. No ostentation, no performance, just Gabriel being Gabriel. "Ready for the news?" he asked, opening the car door for her. Helen got in, curious. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." Gabriel drove through the city, taking routes Helen didn't initially recognize. They talked about their day, about small events, about a documentary they had watched. Together. The conversation flowed naturally, as always, until Gabriel stopped in front of a building in Williamsburg, not far from his office. "What's this place?" Helen asked, looking at the 4-story building with modern but not ostentatious architecture. Gabriel smiled mysteriously. "Come with me." They went inside and up to the 3rd floor. Gabriel opened a door that led to a large space, all under construction. There were architectural plans spread over a makeshift table, material samples, and the basic structure of partitions beginning to take shape. "This is going to be the new office for ethical corporate consulting," Gabriel explained, watching her reaction. "The consultancy has grown so much that we need a bigger space. We'll have rooms for individual consultations, a space for workshops, a small resource library, and look at this." He led her to a specific area. "This space here is reserved for the Phoenix Project. It will have complete privacy, a separate entrance for those who don't want to be seen entering a corporate office. It's a truly safe space." Helen looked around, visualizing the potential. "Gabriel, this is incredible. But it must cost a fortune. Did you get investors?" Gabriel hesitated for a second. "Actually, there's other news. A tech company offered me a strategic partnership. They want to implement ethics and transparency programs in their operations and saw the work we do. It's a big contract, Helen. Very big. It will practically triple the consultancy's revenue." Helen hugged him, genuinely happy for him. "That's wonderful, you deserve it. All the hard work, all the integrity you maintain, even when it would be easier to give in. It's paying off." But she noticed something in his expression. "What is it? Is something worrying you?" Gabriel held her hands. "It's just that with the growth, I'll need to dedicate much more time to work, more travel, more meetings, less free time. And I don't want that to affect us. I don't want you to feel like I'm neglecting you the way your father did when you were a child." Helen's heart ached with his consideration. "Gabriel, the fact that you're worried about this already shows you're different. Professional growth is important. And I understand that. I'm also buried in the company. We'll find a balance. As long as we keep communicating, being honest with each other, it will work out. Are you sure? Because I can refuse the partnership if you think it's too much," Gabriel said, and Helen knew he was serious. He would choose her over the business if he had to. "Don't refuse. This is an amazing opportunity, and I'll be here, supporting you, just like you've always supported me." Helen kissed him softly. "Now show me the rest of the space. I want to know all the plans." They spent the next hour exploring the future office, Gabriel explaining every detail, Helen offering suggestions, both excited about the possibilities. When they left, it was already dark and they were hungry. They went to dinner at a small, cozy restaurant in the West Village, one of their favorite spots, where they could talk without being disturbed. During dinner, Helen shared her own news. "Dad wants me to officially take over as CEO of Caldwell next year. He'll keep a position on the board, but the operational decisions will be mine." Gabriel stopped eating, looking at her with evident pride. "Helen, that's huge. You've always wanted this, even when you wouldn't admit it openly. Are you going to accept?" "I am, but I'm scared. Scared of failing, of not being good enough, of making wrong decisions that harm the people who depend on the company." Helen confessed her insecurities, something she only did with Gabriel. "You're going to be an incredible CEO. You know why? Because you care. You don't see employees as numbers on a spreadsheet. You see people. And yes, you'll make mistakes because everyone does, but you'll learn, you'll adjust, you'll grow. And I'll be here to celebrate your victories and support you through the challenges." Gabriel held her hand across the table. "We're a team, remember?" Helen smiled, feeling the security that only he could bring. "We are a team. And speaking of a team, I was thinking about something. With your new office and my new position, maybe it's time we thought about living together?" It was a topic that had been lingering in the air for a few months, but neither of them had dared to bring it up. Gabriel was silent for a moment, processing. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel pressured. I know that after everything that happened with Edward, the idea of sharing a space might be scary." Helen appreciated his sensitivity, but she was ready. "I'm sure it's not pressure. It's a desire. I want to wake up with you. I want to share breakfast. I want to have a place that's ours. And yes, it's scary because it means vulnerability. It means real commitment. But I trust you, and I want to take this step." Gabriel smiled, that full smile that lit up his entire face. "Then let's do it. Let's find a place that's a reflection of both of us. Not too ostentatious, but comfortable, with space to work from home when needed, with a decent kitchen because I'm finally going to teach you how to make that lasagna you keep asking for." They laughed, planning details, excited about this new phase. In the following weeks, they visited apartments, discussed neighborhoods, debated decor. It was a surprisingly harmonious process. When they disagreed, they talked until they found a middle ground. When one gave in, it was by choice, not pressure. They found a perfect apartment in Williamsburg, 3 bedrooms, lots of natural light, a balcony with a park view, no exaggerated luxury, but comfortable and welcoming. The move happened over a weekend. Friends helped, Maurice showed up with food for everyone, and there was a lot of laughter. When they were finally alone in their new home, surrounded by boxes to unpack, Helen looked around and felt a deep sense of peace. This wasn't an imposed home. It was a choice. Gabriel pulled her into a hug. "Welcome to our home," he whispered, and Helen knew she had made the right decision. The following months brought adjustments. learning to share space, to negotiate routines, to respect each other's moments of silence. There were small arguments, of course, about who forgot to buy milk, about the TV volume, about clothes left on the floor, but they were normal. Arguments resolved with conversation and humor, never with disrespect or manipulation. Helen officially took over as CEO of Caldwell Construction. The transition was smooth, with Morris still present, but making it clear he trusted his daughter's decisions. She implemented significant changes: diversity programs, hiring more women in leadership roles, partnerships with environmental NGOs for sustainable construction. Not everything was easy. There was resistance from old employees, from conservative clients, from suppliers accustomed to the old ways. But Helen persisted, explaining her vision, showing results, proving that ethics and profit could coexist. Gabriel was also thriving. The partnership with the tech company was a success. Ethical corporate consulting opened branches in other cities. The Phoenix Project expanded, serving not only women victims of manipulation, but anyone who needed to rebuild their life after situations of abuse. They received awards, recognition, but what mattered most to Gabriel was the real impact. The stories of people who managed to leave toxic situations, who rebuilt their lives, who found the strength to move forward. One day, Helen received an unexpected call. It was from a journalist who wanted to do a special feature on her story. Initially, Helen hesitated. She had learned to deal with the media, but there was still a part of her that wanted to leave the past behind. She talked to Gabriel about it. It depends on how you feel. If you think your story can help other women, maybe it's worth it. But if it's going to reopen wounds you'd rather keep closed, you have every right to refuse, Gabriel pondered, always leaving the final decision to her. Helen thought for days. Finally, she decided to accept, but with one condition. The story wouldn't be just about her. It would be about all the women who had gone through similar situations. It would be about the pattern of manipulation that exists in society, about how to identify the signs, about the resources available for those who need help. The journalist agreed. The interview was intense. Helen spoke openly about the pain of betrayal, about the healing process, about how she rebuilt her life. But she also spoke about forgiveness, not forgiveness for Edward or Henry. They neither deserved nor asked for it, but forgiveness for herself, for letting herself be manipulated, for not trusting her instincts sooner, for all the small guilt she had carried. Gabriel participated in part of the interview, talking about how it's possible to break free from toxic family patterns, about how to build healthy relationships based on mutual respect. When the article came out, the impact was greater than they expected. Thousands of women got in touch, sharing their own stories. The Phoenix Project was flooded with requests for help. They had to expand even more, hire more professionals, open more support channels. It was exhausting, but also gratifying. Helen saw the purpose in everything she had been through. Her pain had been transformed into a tool for change. 3 years after the fake wedding, Helen and Gabriel were in a stable position, professionally fulfilled, personally happy, building something meaningful together. But there was a conversation lingering in the air. Children. They had never discussed it explicitly, but the topic started to come up indirectly. Comments about children they saw at the park, stories of friends who had become parents, meaningful glances when they passed toy stores. It was on a quiet evening, after dinner at home, that Helen decided to broach the subject. "Gabriel, do you want to have children someday?" The question came out directly, without beating around the bush. Gabriel was washing the dishes and stopped, turning to look at her. "I do, I always have, but only if you want to as well, and only when you feel ready. There's no rush, there's no pressure, and if you decide you don't want to, I will completely understand and respect that." He dried his hands and came closer. "And you? Do you want to?" Helen took a deep breath. "I'm scared. Scared of not being a good mother. Scared of repeating my parents' mistakes. Scared of bringing a child into a world that sometimes seems so cruel." She paused. "But I also have a desire to create a life with you, to teach values we believe in, to see a little piece of us growing and discovering the world. So yes, I want to, but I still need time. I need to feel more secure in that desire." Gabriel hugged her. "Then we'll wait until you're ready. Not 1 year, not 5, not 10. When you're ready. And when that time comes, we'll do it together, like we do everything, step by step. And you'll be an amazing mother, because you're conscious, caring, loving. And you'll have me by your side. We'll figure out how to be parents together, and it will be scary and wonderful at the same time." Helen allowed herself to believe in that possibility, in a future where she wouldn't be defined by the trauma of the past, but by the choices of the present. And as scary as it was, she was willing to try, because she had someone by her side who respected her, who loved her, who saw her as a partner and not as property. And that made all the difference. 5 years. 5 years had passed since that day at the altar, when Helen said yes to a man who didn't love her, not knowing that it would be the day that would change her life forever, but not in the way she imagined. Now, sitting in her CEO office at Caldwell Construction, looking at the framed photo on her desk where she and Gabriel were genuinely smiling during a trip to Hawaii, Helen barely recognized the woman she had been. That Helen was broken inside, even when she smiled on the outside. That Helen constantly doubted herself. But this Helen, the one of now, had learned to trust her own voice. The intercom buzzed. It was her assistant. "Dr. Caldwell, Mr. Maurice is here to see you." Helen smiled. Her father still insisted on visiting her at the office, even though he had passed full command 2 years ago. "Send him in, please." Maurice entered, older but with a renewed vitality. Partial retirement had been good for him. He spent his days doing things he never had time for before. Painting classes, unhurried trips, long lunches with friends. "Daughter, I came to tell you some news." He sat down with that sparkle in his eyes that Helen had learned to associate with good news. "What is it, Dad?" Helen asked, curious. "I've met someone," Maurice said, and for the first time in a long time he seemed shy. "Her name is Vera. She's a literature professor, can you believe it? Like your mother. We met at a book club. She's been a widow for 5 years, has 2 adult children. And, well, we've been seeing each other." He paused. "I wanted to know what you think. I know it might seem strange after so long since your mother." Helen stood up and hugged her father. "Dad, you deserve to be happy. Mom wouldn't have wanted you to be alone forever. I want to meet her. Bring her over for dinner. Gabriel will want to meet her too." Maurice sighed with relief. "Thank you, daughter. Your support means everything to me." He held her hands. "You know, seeing you so fulfilled, so happy, makes me realize that not everything was in vain. I made terrible mistakes. I almost handed you over to a man who didn't deserve you. But you fought. You saved yourself. And you ended up finding someone who truly sees you. That gives me peace. We all make mistakes. Dad, the important thing is to learn from them," Helen smiled. "And you have learned. Look how different you are now. Lighter, more present. That's growth." They talked a bit more before Maurice left, promising to schedule the dinner soon. When Helen got home that night, she found Gabriel in the kitchen preparing dinner. He wore an apron she had given him as a gift, with the embroidered phrase, "Best cook and best partner." The smell of garlic and fresh herbs filled the air. "How was your day?" he asked, turning to give her a quick kiss before returning to the stove. "Productive. We closed a new contract for a sustainable housing complex. It will employ over 200 people from the local community," Helen reported, taking a glass of wine that Gabriel had already poured for her. "And my dad came to tell me he's dating." Gabriel stopped stirring the sauce and turned, surprised. "Really? That's great. How are you feeling about it?" "Happy for him. He deserves it. And the woman seems to be the type he needs. Someone who shares intellectual interests with him, who makes him want to be present." Helen sat at the kitchen counter, watching Gabriel cook. "And you? How was your day?" Gabriel smiled. "We had the graduation for the first class of the professional training program we created for the Phoenix Project. 20 women who went through difficult situations and are now ready to re-enter the job market. Some already have job offers. Seeing them receive their certificates, seeing the hope in their eyes, reminded me of why we do what we do." Helen's heart swelled with pride. "You're amazing, you know that? The work you do truly changes lives, and it inspires me to be better too." "We inspire each other," Gabriel replied, serving dinner. Fresh pasta with homemade tomato and basil sauce, simple but delicious. They sat at the table, continuing the conversation about their days, about small events, about future plans. It was a common domestic scene, but filled with meaning for both of them. It was the life they had chosen together. After dinner, as they washed the dishes side by side in an established routine, Gabriel fell silent for a moment. Helen noticed. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Gabriel dried his hands and turned to her. "Helen, there's something I've wanted to ask you for some time, but I was waiting for the right moment, and I realized there's no perfect moment. There's only the moment we choose." He took a deep breath, pulled something from his pants pocket. It was a small velvet box. Helen's heart raced. Gabriel opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful ring. It wasn't the ostentatious, expensive kind of ring Edward had given her. It was delicate, with a discreet stone, something that suited Helen. Gabriel knelt, not in a performative way, but genuinely and humbly. "Helen, I'm not going to promise that our life will be perfect, because we know perfection doesn't exist. There will be difficult days, arguments, challenges, but I promise I will be by your side through all of them. I promise to respect your choices, support your dreams, and share both the joys and the hardships. I promise never to try to control or diminish you. I promise to be your true partner in everything." He paused, his eyes shining. "Will you marry me? For real this time?" Helen felt the tears stream down her face. They were good tears, of pure emotion. She thought of everything they had been through together, of how Gabriel had been present in every difficult moment, of how he respected her, challenged her, loved her. "Yes, 1,000 times yes," she answered, letting him place the ring on her finger. Gabriel stood up and kissed her, a kiss full of promise and love. When they separated, Helen looked at the ring on her finger. "This time it's real," she whispered. "This time it's for love, not convenience, not to save companies or meet expectations. It's because I choose you. Every day, I choose you." They set the wedding for 6 months later. Unlike the grand, ostentatious ceremony Helen had had with Edward, this time it would be intimate. Only close people, people who truly mattered. The ceremony would be at a country estate in the Hudson Valley, outdoors, with simple but elegant decorations. No ostentation. All about meaning. The months of preparation were calm. Helen didn't feel anxiety, didn't feel that emptiness in her chest. She only felt positive anticipation. Maurice was emotional and proud. Vera, his new girlfriend, had become a constant and cherished presence. She had a gentle wisdom that reminded Helen of Cecilia, but without trying to replace her. Just being herself. A week. Before the wedding, Helen had an important conversation with Maurice. They were at a cafe, enjoying a rare afternoon off. "Dad, I need to ask you something. Do you forgive me for exposing you to that situation with Edward, for taking so long to tell you about my suspicions?" Maurice held his daughter's hand. "Helen, there's nothing to forgive. You were the victim in all of this. You were only trying to protect me, just as I mistakenly was trying to protect you. We both made mistakes out of love. But the important thing is that I learned to listen to you, to respect you as the capable woman you are. And you learned that you don't have to carry everything alone. We're a team. Thank you, Dad, for everything, for changing, for growing, for supporting me when I finally understood what was happening," Helen said, emotional. "I'm the one who should thank you for not giving up on me, even when I was a terrible father," Maurice replied, his eyes misty. "And now I'll have the privilege of walking you down the aisle again, but this time to a man who truly deserves you." The wedding day dawned beautiful. Blue skies, a pleasant temperature, a gentle breeze. The estate was decorated with wildflowers, discreet LED lights hung in the trees, simple wooden chairs for the guests. There were about 50 people, all hand-picked. True friends, colleagues who had become family, people who had supported Helen and Gabriel on their journeys. Helen wore a simple but elegant cream-colored dress, no veil, with her hair down in natural waves. She looked in the mirror and liked what she saw. Not the performative bride from 5 years ago, but a woman who knew who she was, who had scars, but also strength. Morris entered the room where she was getting ready. "You look beautiful, daughter, and more importantly, you look truly happy." "I am, Dad. I'm really happy," Helen replied, taking his arm. "Shall we?" The walk to the altar was unlike anything Helen had experienced before. There was no pomp, no hundreds of judging eyes. Just people who loved her, smiling, some crying with emotion. And at the end of the path, Gabriel. He wore a simple suit, was visibly emotional, and when their eyes met, Helen saw everything she needed to see. Love, respect, partnership, future. Maurice gave Helen to Gabriel with a firm handshake and a hug. "Take good care of my daughter," he said. Gabriel replied, "Always, with my entire being." The ceremony was conducted by an officiant who knew them both well. He spoke of their journey, of how they had found each other amidst the chaos, of how they had built something solid together. It wasn't a traditional religious ceremony, but a celebration of conscious love and real commitment. When it was time for the vows, Helen took a deep breath. "Gabriel, when I met you, I was broken. Not physically, but inside. I had lost faith in people, in the possibility of true love. And you, with your patience, your honesty, your gentle way of seeing me, you helped me rebuild that faith. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy, but it was real. You showed me that love isn't possession, it's freedom. That partnership isn't competition, it's collaboration. Today I choose you not because I need someone to complete me, I am already whole, but because I want to share my whole life with you. I promise to respect you, to support you, to challenge you when necessary, and to love you in all moments, the easy ones and the difficult ones, because that's what true commitment means." Gabriel wiped away the tears that streamed down his face without shame. "Helen, you are the strongest person I know, and I am honored to have been chosen by you. I promise never to take your love for granted. I promise to work every day to be worthy of that choice. I promise to be your safe harbor, but never your cage. I promise to applaud you in your victories and support you in your falls. I promise to build a life with you based on truth, respect, and genuine love. You have made me a better person, and I will spend the rest of my days trying to do the same for you." They exchanged simple rings, unadorned, just the symbol of the commitment they were making. The officiant declared them husband and wife, and when they kissed, it was different. It wasn't the performative, empty kiss Helen had given Edward. It was a kiss of celebration, of gratitude, of the beginning of a new phase they both consciously chose. The party was intimate and joyous. Delicious homemade food, soft live music, genuine conversations. Helen danced with Maurice, who cried throughout the entire song. She danced with Gabriel, who held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. And she allowed herself to be completely happy, without fear, without reservation. Later, as the party was winding down and some guests had already left, Helen and Gabriel stepped away for a bit, walking to a small lake on the estate. They sat there on the grass, watching the reflection of the moon on the water. "How are you feeling?" Gabriel asked softly. "Whole," Helen replied. "That's the word. For a long time I searched for that feeling outside of myself, in the approval of others, in professional achievements, in relationships. But today I understand that being whole comes from within. It comes from knowing yourself, from accepting your own imperfections, from making conscious choices. And you, Gabriel, you helped me get to this place, not because you completed me, but because you respected me while I completed myself." Gabriel pulled her closer. "And you helped me believe that it's possible to be different from the family you come from, that we're not condemned to repeat toxic patterns, that we can choose to be better." He kissed the top of her head. "I'm looking forward to our future, to everything we're going to build together." They stayed there for a while longer, just enjoying each other's presence, planning dreams, sharing hopes. They talked about the possibility of having children the following year, about expanding the Phoenix project even further, about traveling to places they had always wanted to see. They were concrete plans, based on dialogue and mutual respect, not on impositions or unilateral expectations. 6 months after the wedding, Helen discovered she was pregnant. It was a planned surprise, if that makes sense. They had decided to try, but when the test came back positive, the reality hit hard. Gabriel was by her side when she looked at the result. They hugged, laughing and crying at the same time, scared and excited in equal measure. The pregnancy was smooth. Helen continued to work until she was nearly 8 months along, with Gabriel being the most present partner possible. He went to all the doctor's appointments, read books on fatherhood, and set up the baby's room with care and love. Maurice and Vera were also excited, already buying gifts and offering constant help. The family was growing, transforming, creating new bonds. Clara was born on a spring morning, a healthy baby girl with curious eyes and chubby cheeks. When Helen held her for the first time, she felt an overwhelming love, unlike anything she had ever experienced. And she also felt fear. Fear of failing, of repeating mistakes, of not being good enough. But when she looked at Gabriel, who was watching mother and daughter with tears of joy, she knew she wasn't alone. They would do this together, one day at a time, learning, making mistakes, getting it right, growing. The first few months were challenging. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, constant uncertainties. But they were also magical. Every smile from Clara, every developmental milestone, every moment of connection. Helen and Gabriel took turns with the care, dividing tasks equally, always supporting each other. When Helen returned to work, they hired a trusted nanny, but remained present, prioritizing quality time with their daughter. Clara grew up in an environment of love, respect, and equality. She saw her father cook and her mother work. She saw them share household chores without arguments about gender roles. She saw respectful conversations even when there were disagreements. She was being raised with values that Helen and Gabriel considered essential: empathy, integrity, the courage to do the right thing, even when it's hard. 10 years had passed since that wedding. That was a bet. Helen was now 38. She looked back and saw an incredible journey. There were moments of pain, yes, scars that would never completely disappear, but also so many victories, so much growth, so much genuine love. Caldwell Construction was now a benchmark in sustainable construction and social responsibility. Gabriel's ethical corporate consulting had offices in 10 American cities. The Phoenix Project had already helped over 1,000 women rebuild their lives. Edward and Henry Morrison had disappeared from the public radar. Morrison Holdings had been sold off in pieces, and the family had lost the empire it took decades to build. Helen didn't feel satisfaction at their downfall, only a sense of justice served. She rarely thought of them. Her focus was on the present, the future, the life she was actively building. On a random Saturday afternoon, Helen was at the park with 4-year-old Clara and Gabriel. Clara was running between the trees, laughing, free. Helen watched her daughter and thought of everything she had achieved. She thought of the scared girl who was about to walk down the aisle 10 years ago. If she could go back in time, what would she say to her? Maybe she would say, "Trust yourself. Your intuition is right. You are stronger than you imagine. And in the end, it will all make sense. The pain will turn into wisdom. The betrayal will turn into discernment. And you will find true love. Not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind, built day by day with choice and commitment." Gabriel came over, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, knowing her well enough to sense when she was deep in thought. "About how it was all worth it," Helen replied simply. "Every tear, every fight, every moment of pain, it was worth it because it brought me here, because it transformed me into the person I was always meant to be, because it taught me that I was never anyone's property. I was always my own, and I always will be." Gabriel kissed her softly. "And I will have the honor of walking by your side, respecting your independence, celebrating your strength, sharing this life with you." They stood there watching Clara play, aware that they were living the exact life they had chosen. Not a perfect life, but an authentic one, and that was more valuable than any fairy tale. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen and Gabriel has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of reconstruction, resilience, and true love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most in this story. Every day we bring intense stories, like this one, which reveal the strength of the human soul and show that it's always possible to start over, always possible to choose your own freedom. Helen's story teaches us that it's never too late to say no to what diminishes us, and yes, to what makes us grow. That healthy relationships are built on respect, not control. That our inner strength is greater than any adversity. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode, with more stories that will move you and inspire you to live with more courage and authenticity.